Why'd you move out of your room?
It was too noisy.
All right, everybody, FBI. Don't anybody try to leave. Stand on your feet, put your hands over your head.
In 1973, The Sting appeared as a grand con on the big screen, telling the story of Johnny Hooker and Henry Gondorff, two master con artists, joining forces to execute a scheme that leaves gangster Doyle Lonnegan empty-handed. The film quickly won over both audiences and critics, earning 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, and cementing the talents of the cast and director George Roy Hill. But behind the on-screen glamour, the set of The Sting was filled with countless dramatic secrets. The film sparked a series of legal battles related to the book The Big Con, and its sequel was nearly forgotten by audiences. The famous poker scenes were actually performed by a card magic expert substituting for Newman. Curious about the secrets behind the Sting watch the full video to discover them all. 20. All the card tricks were done by a stand-in. Paul Newman amazed audiences as Henry Gondorff, a suave and cunning con artist, capable of controlling any poker game with a few deft moves. However, the truth is that Newman did not perform those complex card tricks himself. Instead, the production brought in a true master of the craft, John Scarn, a 20th century card manipulation legend. Scarn was not only famous for his precise control of cards, but was also dubbed the man with the fastest hands in the world in the Magic community. He appeared in close-up shots, performing techniques so difficult they were nearly impossible to learn in a short time. Few viewers noticed this substitution, which is a testament to its flawless execution. 19. Reuniting the Golden Trio 4 years after creating a sensation with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the trio Paul Newman, Robert Redford, George Roy Hill reunited for The Sting. In Butch Cassidy, Newman and Redford left their mark in a buddy western that was both humorous and tragic. In The Sting, they shifted to a complex, clever and dramatic con game story. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was a major boost, elevating Redford from a mid-level star to a household name and cementing Newman's image as a rebellious, clever figure. The film won 4 Oscars, became a symbol of the 1960s, and helped define the buddy movie genre. However, in terms of artistic and commercial success, The Sting surpassed its predecessor. With its tight script, unique chaptered structure, meticulously recreated 1930s setting, and Scott Joplin's ragtime music, the film created a con world so captivating that even the audience became victims of the final grand scheme. The result? The Sting became a cultural phenomenon, earning over $250 million from a $5.5 million budget, receiving 10 Oscar nominations and winning 7, including major categories such as Best Picture, Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. It was also the only Oscar nomination in Redford's acting career. Here, Newman and Redford were no longer just co-stars. They truly blended in a perfectly balanced dynamic, supporting each other to create a flawless duo. Which film do you prefer more? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 18. Newman needed a hit today. Paul Newman is celebrated as one of cinema's immortal icons, but entering the 1970s, his career was far from smooth. After the peak of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, Newman took on several major projects, but not every film lived up to expectations. Movies like Pocket Money, 1972, and The Macintosh Man, 1973, featured him, but failed to make a commercial impact, even being considered disappointments relative to his status as a top Hollywood star. Although studios still valued him, the string of underperforming films led the public to question whether his golden era was fading. It was a fragile period. Newman had never lost his talent or reputation, but he lacked a powerful hit to remind the world that he remained an irreplaceable star. The Sting arrived at exactly the right moment. The film not only achieved spectacular success with 7 Oscars, but also confirmed that Newman was still a massive box office draw. His role as Henry Gondorff, cunning, witty, and substantial, helped him escape the shadow of earlier lackluster projects and brought his career back onto a brilliant trajectory. 17. The villain changed and Shaw really limped. The villain Doyle Lonergan in The Sting underwent an unexpected casting change just before filming. Initially, the role was given to Richard Boone, a familiar face from the American TV series Have Gun Will Travel. However, shortly before shooting, Boone suddenly disappeared from the project without any explanation. He stopped communicating, leaving the crew in a crisis. The central villain role was suddenly vacant. In this emergency, Robert Shaw was invited to replace him. This decision later proved extremely wise, but it came with another challenge. Just 1 week before filming, Shaw injured his knee in a tennis match. Normally, this would have been a serious obstacle, potentially delaying production. But director George Roy Hill chose not to back down. He decided to turn the disadvantage into an advantage, incorporating Shaw's limp into Lonergan's character. From there, the image of a cold-blooded mob boss with a limping gait was born. The leg brace was hidden beneath the wide 1930s-style clothes, turning a real-life injury into a distinctive film trait. This made Lonergan appear even more cold and terrifying. Are you impressed by this villain? Share your thoughts in the comments. 16. The screenwriter wanted to direct, but Redford stopped him. The Sting almost became the directorial debut of its own screenwriter David S. Ward. When the script was still incomplete, only drafted and narrated by Ward producers Tony Bill Michael and Julia Phillips were so captivated that they signed an agreement for him to both write and direct. A then unknown screenwriter, never having held a camera, was about to lead a major Universal project. A bold prospect that astonished many in the industry. Everything changed when Robert Redford, targeted for the lead role, began reviewing the project. He openly expressed concerns a complex story with multiple layers of deception could not be entrusted to a novice director. Not out of disdain for Ward, but because Redford understood the risk. If the script was that good, it deserved the hand of an experienced director. Under pressure from the talent the project attracted, Ward had to step back. It was a difficult but reasonable decision. George Roy Hill, later invited to direct, turned The Sting into a masterpiece, earning 7 Oscars. Ward, though losing the opportunity for his debut, later proved his talent and perseverance directing successful scripts, including Major League, King Ralph, and The Program. This step back opened the path for him to build his directing career, while the film itself remained a 1970s cinematic high point. 15. The film was sued 4 times. The Sting didn't start as a cinematic sensation, but from a dry research book. Screenwriter David S. Ward, searching for material for a completely different project, happened upon The Big Con by David Mara. This was not casual beach reading, but an in-depth investigation into the underworld of real con artists, their language tactics, and elaborate schemes. Among this, Ward discovered a gem: the story of 2 clever con men, Fred and Charlie Gondorf. The name Gondorf, as we know later, became the central character in The Sting. However, this detail sparked a legal drama almost as elaborate as the film's cons. Maurer, as both a scholar and a victim of intellectual theft, noticed striking similarities between his book and the film script, from con methods, language usage, to directly lifting character names. He refused to remain silent and sued Universal Pictures for plagiarism. The case was settled out of court for around 600 salaries, but it annoyed Ward, who had used many non-fiction sources for research and never plagiarized. That was only the first. Soon after, a company called Followay Productions also sued Universal, claiming they had purchased exclusive adaptation rights to The Big Con in 1952, and any film based on it violated their rights. However, the lawsuit was quickly dismissed because Followay could not prove legal ownership of the adaptation rights. Paul Newman personally became involved in legal disputes surrounding the film. He sued the California Tax Authority to reclaim state income tax paid on his earnings from The Sting. arguing that this income should have been taxed at out-of-state rates. The lawsuit was resolved in Newman's favour. Later, he and director George Roy Hill sued Universal over lost VHS sales revenue from The Sting and Slapshot, but this case was ultimately dismissed by the court. 14. The director gave Redford a special gift to tease him. During filming, Robert Redford once complained that his role as Johnny Hooker had nothing to act other than running from one scene to another. A rising star craving complex internal challenges suddenly found himself boxed into a hurried, anxious con artist role, which naturally frustrated Redford. Director George Roy Hill, known for being strict yet playful, did not miss the chance to troll his actor. At the end of filming, Hill gave Redford a special gift, a small statue of the cartoon character Roadrunner, the eternally fast-running character from the famous animated series, accompanied by a teasing inscription: "If you can't be good, be fast." 13. Music brought unexpected success. The music in The Sting was a surprisingly bold choice, even controversial from a historical perspective. Director George Roy Hill and composer Marvin Hamlish decided to use ragtime, a musical style that flourished in the early 20th century associated with Scott Joplin. The problem was that the film's setting was in the 1930s, a period when ragtime was almost completely outdated, replaced by jazz swing and blues. From the standpoint of period authenticity, ragtime was an incongruous choice, but it was precisely this offbeat decision that created irresistible appeal. Hamlish did not merely use Joplin's music, he reimagined it, orchestrating it in a concert style that transformed ragtime's rustic melodies into something elegant, sparkling, and cinematic. Tunes like The Entertainer resonated with a blend of classic charm and gentle satire, perfectly complementing the film's con game narrative. This was no random choice. Ragtime had appeared in the crime film The Public Enemy. 1931, and Hill clearly aimed to evoke the spirit of classic gangster films through this musical detail. The effect exceeded expectations. The Sting soundtrack rose to number 1 on the Billboard charts in 1974, while Hamlish's rendition of The Entertainer entered the top 10, even climbing to number 3. This success not only revived Joplin's music, but also sparked a new ragtime craze among the American public in the 1970s. It can be said that The Sting accomplished something few films dared to try, using an outdated music style to tell a contemporary story and turning that very obsolescence into a trend. Music, seemingly a mere accessory, ultimately became one of the film's greatest legacies. The kind of soundtrack that immediately evokes the iconic cinematic con with just a few notes. 12. The Wine Glass Toss was a real accident. Do you remember the scene where Charles Durning's character Snyder loses his temper and throws a glass of wine directly into Billy's hand? In reality, that clumsy swing was not a planned artistic choice, but an accident on set. This scene was not in the script. Normally, such a mishap would prompt the director to yell cut and start over. But George Roy Hill took a bold approach, keeping the take because the spontaneity made the on-screen moment feel vivid and unpredictable, just like a real-life confrontation. Did you enjoy this scene, or is there another detail in the film that stands out to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 11. Edith Head won her final Oscar for the film Let's Talk About Fashion, because The Sting did not just captivate audiences with a clever plot and skilled acting. Edith Head, a legendary name in Hollywood costume design, was responsible for the film's refined beauty and charisma. With a career spanning nearly 6 decades, she was not only a designer, but also an icon of precision creativity and timeless vision. Head was nominated for an Oscar 35 times, a record few can touch, and won 8 times, more than any other designer in history. The Sting gave her the final victory of that illustrious career. Set in 1930s Chicago, the film demanded meticulous attention to detail, from Paul Newman's tailored suits and Robert Redford's fedoras to subtle elements like Ty's pocket squares and the female characters' elegant fitted dresses. Everything exuded period style while maintaining cinematic drama. That 8th Oscar win was a tribute to Edith Head, who shaped the images of classic stars from Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly to Elizabeth Taylor. Were you impressed by the actors' costumes in the film? Share your thoughts in the comments. 10. Reshooting the entire film in the first week. From the first week of filming, The Sting nearly fell into crisis. George Roy Hill reviewed the opening scene where Johnny Hooker and Luther Coleman execute a small con in a dark alley and was immediately dissatisfied. Without hesitation, Hill made the bold decision to reshoot the entire sequence. A risky move under the pressures of cost schedule and studio expectations. But to him, if the opening scene failed, the whole film would collapse on its first impression with the audience. Screenwriter David S. Ward later admitted that it was the only time he truly doubted the film's future. While the crew held their breath, Hill followed his instincts. The decision proved correct. The reshot scene became coherent, sharp, and perfectly set the pace for the masterful con narrative that followed. From then on, the atmosphere on set changed completely. Actors and technicians praised Hill's direction, strict yet fun-disciplined, yet full of energy. 9. Sets completely rebuilt. The Sting is set in 1936. Chicago, but most of the film was not actually shot in the city. Instead of recreating a lost Chicago, the production team rebuilt the entire space on Universal Studios' backlot. The bustling streets, casinos, shops, and even restaurants were facades and recycled sets previously used in other studio productions. Of course, to enhance depth and authenticity, a few real locations were filmed, such as Union Station and LaSalle Street Station in Chicago, giving the audience a sense of period connection. But these were rare highlights. The bulk of the environment relied on Universal's elaborate fake sets. A fun anecdote among fans is that the diner in The Sting later became the location where Marty McFly meets his father in Back to the Future. This idea is appealing because it connects two cinematic masterpieces shot at the same studio. 8. The sequel was inspired by the original. 10 years after. The Sting's triumphant success, Universal attempted to capitalize on its legacy with a sequel, The Sting im Sound. 1983. Although the script was again written by Oscar-winning David S. Ward, almost all elements that gave the original its soul were gone. Director George Roy Hill did not return, replaced by Jeremy Paul Kagan. Redford and Newman were absent, replaced by Mac Davis and Jackie Gleason. A pairing immediately unfavourably compared to the original. Ward tried to write a continuing story, but the film lost its way. Characters Hooker, Gondorf and Lonergan appeared under new names, and appearances making the audience feel it was not an official continuation, but a pale imitation. The absence of the Redford-Newman duo combined with a lifeless pacing prevented The Sting 2 from ever achieving the original's glory. The result was a flop. The Sting 2 earned just over $6 million at the US, box office tiny compared to the global success of its predecessor. Critics were ruthless. Most called the film bland, soulless, and completely unnecessary. Many fans even refused to recognise it as an official sequel. 7. Paul Newman and George Roy Hill were master pranksters. Paul Newman and director George Roy Hill were famous for being master pranksters in Hollywood, frequently staging playful tricks to enliven the set. A well-known anecdote is the $8 bill story. According to film lore, Hill invited Newman to his office and asked him to bring some drinks. The evening was relaxed, but the next day, Hill was surprised to receive an $8 bill from Newman. Not to be outdone, Hill responded with a long philosophical letter about friendship and pettiness in Newman's actions. This was just a warm-up for a bigger prank. A few days later, Newman struck back by sneaking into Hill's office with a power saw, cutting his desk in half. and leaving a cold message. This is not about friendship, it's about $8. I could blow up your office, so don't panic. The story grew more dramatic when Universal allegedly sent Newman an $800 bill for the damaged desk. Of course, Newman never paid it. 6. Newman's role was originally written for an overweight, sloppy supporting character. In fact, the on-screen image of Henry Gondorff was very different from the character originally envisioned in David S. Ward's script. In the earliest drafts, Gondorff was merely a supporting character, a portly, messy, gruff man who served as a wise elderly mentor to a young 19-year-old Johnny Hooker. This character appeared only briefly, even somewhat faded, primarily acting as a background figure to highlight the main young protagonist. The producers even considered casting someone like Peter Boyle for the role to preserve the image of an older, unattractive man, the kind of experienced teacher with no charm. In that original vision, Gondorff was a heavy, uninspiring character, not designed to become a centre of audience attraction. Everything changed when Paul Newman read the script. He was immediately captivated and insisted on playing Gondorff. This was a turning point with Newman's charisma appearance and reputation. The role could no longer retain the portly, sloppy traits it originally had. Ward had to rewrite the character, making Gondorff sharper, more charming, and expanding the character's screen presence to match Newman's talents. 5. Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Each paid $500 when The Sting began production. Paul Newman and Robert Redford were two of Hollywood's most valuable stars, and their salaries reflected that status. Each was paid $500,000, an enormous sum in the early 1970s when the average salary for well-known actors was much lower. Notably, Newman also had a profit-sharing clause showing that Universal was willing to bet on his box office draw. At the time, this was a risky but calculated investment. The Sting not only became a cinematic phenomenon, but also earned hundreds of millions of dollars, turning the huge salaries of Newman and Redford into a bargain for the producers. 4. 1930s style. George Roy Hill successfully recreated the atmosphere of 1930s American cinema in the film. From the very start, he chose to use the classic Universal logo seen in older films, like a portal transporting the audience back in time. Hill also employed numerous filming and editing techniques that had nearly vanished from modern Hollywood: the wipe transition, where the new scene sweeps across the screen instead of a straight cut, and the iris shot, a darkening circle that closes the frame characteristic of silent films and early talkies. Hill also deliberately limited the crowd in many street scenes. Empty avenues and frames devoid of dense pedestrian traffic evoke the feel of classic gangster films, where the central character's fate is set against a sparse, isolated, tense backdrop. This allowed the audience to focus entirely on the con game, where every glance and gesture from Newman and Redford became sharper than ever. Combined with muted brown tones, Edith Head's classic costumes and title cards styled like Saturday Evening Post illustrations, Hill built a world that not only recreated the 1930s, but also revived the cinematic spirit of the era. 3. The vintage car came from co-producer Tony Bill. An especially interesting contribution came from co-producer Tony Bill, a renowned vintage car enthusiast. Not only did he serve as a producer, but he also directly brought his personal passion into the project by sourcing and collecting authentic period cars for the set. Most notably, a rare 1935 Pierce Arrow owned personally by Bill was used as the private vehicle for Doyle Lonergan, the notorious mob boss in the film. 2. Shaw passed away. Soon after the film, Robert Shaw brought Doyle Lonergan to life as a cold, ruthless, cunning and terrifying villain captivating audiences. Yet few know that just a few years after the film's release, Shaw died suddenly. In August 1978, while driving near his home in Ireland, he suffered a massive heart attack. He only managed a few steps out of the car before collapsing and never regained consciousness. Shaw died at the age of 51 at the peak of his career. His death added another layer of meaning to the Lonergan role. In the final scene, when Lonergan loses everything in the big con, Shaw's pained expression seems to echo his real-life tragedy, a proud, powerful man brought down in an instant. Audiences revisiting The Sting often feel a strange haunting knowing the actor passed away so soon after filming. 1. The horse racing office detail matches real history. One of the details that makes The Sting astonishing is the historical accuracy of Gondorf's horse race betting con. Most of the horses mentioned in the betting scene were not fictional. They were real horses that ran in the 1930s. Even one of the jockeys, named J. Stout, actually participated in races at that time. This precision added weight to the enormous con when the audience, and even Lonergan, are drawn into numbers, names, and betting sheets that seem real. Everything becomes convincingly undeniable. The Sting is a masterpiece woven from countless fascinating details, intense behind-the-scenes stories, and unexpected anecdotes. From the pranks of Newman and Hill, the obsessive attention to horse racing authenticity, to the outdated ragtime music that became legendary, all of these elements turned the film into a Hollywood monument. More than half a century later, The Sting still retains its peculiar charm, funny tense, clever in its cons, yet haunting due to the real-life tragedies of its cast. Which of these 20 facts surprised or impressed you the most? Leave a comment so we can discuss together. Thank you for following this journey into the making of The Sting. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to catch more captivating film stories ahead.